If you could please come to the table. We're a little behind on our schedule and we've lots to cover tonight.
There's a quorum, Mr. Fairfax.
All right, members, thank you all for being here tonight. The first item on our agenda will be things that have come before the Governance Committee. And the first one is something that I called my colleague, Miss McLaughlin, on, and she is skedaddling for a lovely family vacation. So this thing that is brought before us, options for issue education and advocacy for letters from the school board. This is something that was brought before the Governance Committee, I guess, at the end of last year, and it's not something that the Governance Committee, while I was chairing, we discussed. So it is new to me in a way that it's new to all of you as we're reviewing it tonight. I would like anybody who's been on who was on governance last year, is anyone who was on governance?
I was on governance.
Miss Evans, you can use your microphone.
Okay, I'm going to have to refresh my memory. I believe this was as a result of some of the advocacy letters, and we wanted to have a systematic approach to advocacy letters to make sure that we had a way of going about it, and we knew exactly what everybody could expect. So I believe I don't even remember who brought this to a forum. Mr. McElveen, were you the one who brought this to the forum? Oh, I see. Oh, okay.
So
I see. That's right. Because we had a couple of advocacy letters, and
correct.
Yes,
we've had a couple of advocacy letters, and there was no defined process, and so this, I believe, if you look at the red line changes, and we can start right there. And if you haven't read it, take a moment to do that. And I will start taking questions on this because it's pretty self-explanatory. The first change, you can see it may be made for a board during a work session. That was changed. Request the board vote for a report on an area of significant concern under 3. And then there is extensive new language under item 4. And so if you want to take a moment to review that, we can do that. And if not, I can begin taking questions. I will start with Ms. Strauss, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Okay, on the beginning with number 4, my initial read is I think that's fine. I think that helps to clarify that. And if the board has not taken a formal position, I think clarifying, the undersigned are the people who are supporting that. The one question that I have is on 3 and 4. It's my understanding that under the guidelines from the state, obviously, in an election season, what have you, people take various positions and may disagree at the table. But we have never formally encouraged or sanctioned formal letters from colleague school board members to go out in opposition or dissent from a position that the board has already taken. Usually what the state asks is that obviously, the vote is as it is, and people's, speeches at the board table are recorded, but then the board is supposed to go on and not continue unless you're in a political situation, which then that's a very different situation. You're not acting on behalf of the board. That would be my one question.
I think, it's a good question. It's a question to the group. And I think, as I said, since I was not part of the team that put this together, I think what we need to do is we need to look at this as where, if we think this is the right direction going forward. I think one of the things that is new and that didn't happen is under one, about some of the advocacy letters. It's the views expressed herein may not represent the views of the entire school board, or as you see, the views expressed here in review represent the views of the undersigned. That's not something that we have done before.
Right, and I think that that's fair because we have kind of done that, but we've never really regular. It's really item 4.
Item 4.4, is that what you're saying? Under 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be B, C, and D, I think. For
Right.
more greater clarity.
Because it's my understanding from the recommended code of conduct from the state and VSBA that there is, discouragement once we've taken a vote that we are supposed to go forward.
Right, that's the board's vote.
Right.
I think that's the encouraged policy. I don't think that's a...
It's not code.
It's not code.
But that
Right.
would be my
Right.
question.
Okay.
This is a different...
So
place for
you're just saying number 4 you're not as comfortable with as you would like. So, all right. Noted. I have Miss Corbett Sanders, followed by Mr. McElveen, followed by Miss Keys-Gamarra, and then Mr. Moon.
Thank you, and thank you to the Governance Committee for working on this, both last year's Governance Committee and this year's, which passively supported it, it sounds like, so that we are finally talking about it at this table. I do have a question regarding what constitutes an advocacy letter. So, for example, if a magisterial member is supporting a grant request for a school or a ramp application, and you submit a letter of support, is that an advocacy letter, or are we parsing out what an advocacy is? Advocacy only on policy issues, and then magisterial support is different. I don't see a definition of advocacy, so can someone clarify that?
If I may. I believe advocacy, what the issue was talking about issues. And grants, I believe, are a whole other thing where at least I have been advised that we really should go through central office before doing that. Unless, we need to coordinate, what we are asking for to make sure that we're not asking for a grant that somehow competes with. So I read this as being just about issues and grants being a separate thing. And we might want, but you raise a good issue, we might want to codify what we are supposed to do in terms of supporting grants.
So for the purpose of tonight's discussion, if we could somehow amend this to make sure it's focused on the advocacy of policy, and then obviously if governance or PEC want to take on the second piece. I do coordinate with the superintendent anytime I am sending a letter. However, I don't believe it's something that has to go to the full board if I'm supporting the effort of Mount Vernon to get educational programming or things like that. And so we just want to clarify that. And then as to the subparagraph 4, I think that does warrant a fuller discussion, because if we speak as a board, if we vote as a board, then dissent is indicated at the board table. I'm not sure we want to have a situation where we're issuing dissenting opinions on on policies that have been voted on. The dissent is shown by the vote.
All right. Mr. McElveen.
So I agree with Janie and Karen's comments on on number 4. I think it tacitly violates other provisions of our governance manual by putting this in there, because once the board adopts a position, it moves forward as a board, right? As with the board position. That doesn't mean individuals can't personally have concerns with that, but this is saying specifically that we're specifically condoning dissenting views being put on our letterhead. That doesn't mean we currently can't do that, but I don't think we necessarily want to include this language in a document that otherwise would contradict it.
All right. Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
I wanted to register my concurrence with Ms. Strauss and Karen Corbett-Sanders, and Ryan McElveen said what I wanted to say with respect to, because I've gone freshly through the new members. To me, at least, it's my understanding we are to speak as one voice. That doesn't mean we have to be in agreement, and I agree with Ms. Corbett-Sanders that we are to express that dissent from the dais. I have great concern about any member of this board who disagrees with the decision we have made as a body that actively then begins to solicit support from the community to go against that decision. And so I think that would be, for lack of a better word, a royal mess. And for that reason, I wouldn't support it.
All right. Mr. Moon.
I guess I could be one of those who may not be fully agreeing with you on this one. That overall, I think it strikes a balance between our general a good principle of governance that once a decision is made by the board, you need to respect the decision of the board and try to refrain from the work of the board. At the same time, even dissenting board members, do not lose their First Amendment rights. That as an elected official, having own views, gotta be able to express if he or she so desires. So I think what the governance committee has come up with, I think strikes that balance. My question is rather in that regards, my question also goes to the very first sentence under Section 4, where it says that individual board members may wish to issue advocacy letters. And it says, in the next line, it says, where there is not adequate opportunity for board review and discussion in an open meeting. I hope that part, that second part of that sentence is not a precondition. It's not a condition for anyone, any board member to issue an advocacy letter. Even if there is an ample opportunity for board member to bring a certain issue to the full board's attention, to have a discussion and have the decision by the board. Again, this goes to the heart of First Amendment right of an individual school board member to be able to write letters that whenever, even fully knowing that there is an opportunity for that person to bring it to the full board, that person has gotta retain their right to write letters. So, in general, I support what the governance committee has come up with an understanding that the second part of first sentence does not condition that any board members' right of issuing letters.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moon. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Moon, for standing up for the First Amendment rights of all board members. As you say, we don't lose them at any point in time. So I think that we have to be very careful in any policy that we establish to setting the example that we're going to quash dissenting voices in particular on this board. So I would definitely echo your sentiments in that regard. The initial question I have is for the chair as to how this, since I've been on the governance committee this year and last year, how this exited the governance committee, since my recollection is that the governance committee never agreed upon this language, let alone completed our discussions.
Weren't you on the governance
I
committee
was.
last year?
Yeah, that's my recollection is we didn't finish our discussion.
I guess I would ask Ms. Malberg then, since I was not, for the encapsulated minutes. So please, you have a microphone? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so if I will repeat that, our clerk, Ms. Malberg, stated that the governance committee did sign off on it to go to the full board as part of the revisions to the school board governance manual. And I guess when it comes out, then that, just for process for people who are listening, when it comes out, then it goes to the chair and vice chair for them to schedule a work session. And
well, maybe the clerk can clarify what meeting did that occur at?
She doesn't have it off the top of her head, but she can you get that for us, Ms. Malberg, while we continue our discussion?
In any event, I think that since I think maybe a year has gone past, it's quite a bit of dust, and I really wish that the governance committee had a chance within a regular meeting of the governance committee to pull this out before we brought it to the board, because it was as if first impression for me when I saw this in the agenda today, to reading it and the various questions that came to mind. Actually, Mr. Moon has touched on the first sentence, and I would agree that that first sentence is pretty troubling, because where there's not adequate opportunity is very vague language. When don't we have adequate opportunity to hold a meeting and discuss, particularly when it's a matter of just public policy? That seems to be the exact situation where we should take the time to have a public discussion. So, right off the bat, I think I have trouble with the whole concept and the precondition that is set up for this Section 4. And I would say that in virtually all cases, we have the opportunity. It's just a matter of this board making the effort to get together and have a public discussion. My feeling is that the board today should gather the thoughts of the board in general, and that we should take it back to governance committee to work on. And I know that in September we are going to be reviewing the changes to the governance committee manual, and maybe we will have a clearer presentation to the board and be able to answer questions directly, as opposed to demurring to members of the governance committee from years past to recall what the discussions were. I think that would be a much better approach, Madam Chair. So that would be my preference today.
Noted. Thank you. Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I'll just state my own view on this. I do think there are times when we want to make a public statement, and there may not be time for a meeting. We meet every 2 weeks, and sometimes there are matters of facing deadlines. So I would think that would be the times when we would want to allow something like this to happen, where people could sign on to a letter. So I think that first sentence makes sense to me. On the second piece of it, 1 and 2, I would suggest that we collapse those two, and rather than talking about, they're so similar, and I'm thinking that it would make more sense to encourage board members to use school board letterhead and get whatever signatures they they do and say and use that phrase, the views expressed here and represent the views of the undersigned, and may not represent the views of the entire board. I think that could make sense, unless somebody can think of an instance where that wouldn't suit. I think that second one with a little bit of massaging could do that. On the number 4, I do agree with Mr. Moon that First Amendment rights are important. We all need to be able to, for one thing, let our constituents know how we voted on something and why we voted that way and what our individual views are. At the same time, I do believe that we are asked to respect board decisions and not act counter to it. So I'm wondering if there is, if we could amend that a bit. And I'm just, jotting things down on paper now. But we could say expressly that members may express their dissent from a board position, but are expected to not actively advocate in opposition to it. I'm thinking if we've all been in a position. We've all been in a position where we've disagreed with board actions, and yet I believe we are expected not, for example, to go to Richmond and say, well, my board supports pre-Labor Day starts, but I don't, so I want you to vote against it. I believe doing something like that would violate our code of conduct. I could be wrong, but so I think maybe
You're correct on that. Yes.
So I think while board members may express dissent, they can say whatever they want. I think to actively lobby against a board position is because we speak as a board. I think we need to continue to speak as a board while still maintaining everybody's First Amendment rights to say what their own beliefs are.
So just for clarity, Ms. Evans, how do you fall on number 4? I guess that's what it is, because I think you've played both sides of it in your argument.
Well, where I fall is to amend it, and what I've just doodled on a piece of paper here is members may express dissent from a board position, but are expected to refrain from active advocacy against a formal board decision.
Okay. I think where I'm going to go here I have Ms. Schultz and Ms. Palchak, and then I have several go-backs. And as I think you can all hear, we're all listening here, I think we had 4 people for paragraph 4, a couple people, like 2 or 3 now, against paragraph 4, parts of paragraph 4, and some for. I think what I will do, and I think for purposes of this discussion, because as you can see, even the former governance members kind of are just getting refreshed with this. Perhaps what we can do, and I think I'll just take the context of the conversation this way, is if you have suggestions for changes, let's forward those to the clerk and me as the chair of the governance committee, and then we may have to talk about this again, because I just think now I have everybody wanting to talk again now that I said that. But that's my thought right now, but I'll be open to suggestions. We start with Ms. Schultz and Ms. Palchak, who have not spoken yet, and then I believe I have 6 go-backs now.
Okay, so it's interesting, the conversation that happened prior to mine. I wrote fundamental questions. When did this get put on our agenda? When did this get put on tonight's agenda?
I guess, several weeks ago, because the governance committee had several issues that were supposed to come to the MSAOC.
I think it was supposed to be on the Monday work session, and then
yes, that was it.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been trying to find a spot
Okay,
for this for a while.
and what was the mechanism by which it got on this agenda?
The way it
Or
works,
Monday's agenda and got moved here?
Elizabeth, the way they work is, you know, that something comes out of governance after review. It then goes to the chair and vice chair, and then they look at that in totality with what has deadlines, what has time, you know,
But
sensitive
so
issues,
this has recently been worked on by this governance committee.
No.
Okay, so that's my question. If it has not been worked on by the governance committee, what was the mechanism by which this was sort of, I don't know. This was in some ether out there.
It's not an ether. I think what happens is governance has many issues, often issues that, you know, are time sensitive. And I think what we worked on a lot, this was done. So this never came to me as part of the agenda, as part of the chair. This was done. And then some of our more time sensitive issues, the things governance talked about, you know, the wireless communication thing, and I can't even remember what else we talked about.
So this has been in a holding pattern somewhere?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to renew my question, which is, how did it get out of whatever holding pattern and make it to
That's
this
the decision
agenda?
of the chair and vice chair how to schedule things for our work sessions.
So somebody had it on a list and they decided to resurrect it right now and put it on our agenda.
There were several things coming out of governance that had been languishing, and they needed to be
But it
brought to
didn't
the
come out
board.
of governance because the current governance committee hasn't worked on it at all.
Well,
So that's
however
a-
it is, you want to know how it came. It was coded as something that governance committee had asked to come to the board.
Well,
So-
a former governance committee, so not the existing. I mean, we've already established that the current governance committee didn't work on it. So this has been languishing for at least a year and somehow made its way to our agenda tonight.
It was a housekeeping issue dealing with the manual, so I don't know. Import.
It was a housekeeping. That still doesn't answer my question.
I got it. I got that you're unhappy with the process.
We struggle
so.
with our agendas a lot, and we have existing committees. And for example, you know, I've been struggling to get, you know, SHAC fully staffed by appointees from this committee, and there's really important work that SHAC needs to bring forward, and they've struggled to get the work done being sort of half appointed. I've struggled getting the CPDC work that's coming forward and waited for a slot on an upcoming work session to get CP. No, but what I'm saying is that this has materialized out of thin air, and I'm wondering on what governance mechanism did this actually follow in our governance, ironically, to get to this agenda? And I'm not.
I spoke to last year's governance chair. She is out tonight, Ms. McLaughlin.
Well, that's part of my. That's part of my concern.
She said that this was something that the governance group last year, where she chaired, worked on, passed, and our process, Ms. Schultz, as you know, is once that happens, then it goes to the chair and vice chair in order to bring it to the full board.
Right. And so it sat for a year, and that's part of that you've highlighted. Part of my concern is that we have a colleague who participated in this in governance who can't even be with us tonight. So why do we? This is not time sensitive. It's waited a year. So what's another month to allow the people who participated in the development of this language?
I'm not disagreeing with you if you heard my further
Okay.
points. So do you have any questions on the language here?
I do. I appreciate a little bit what Mr. Moon was saying, but I'm going to say from what's up here, first of all, I'm not exactly sure why any of this is up here. I think the bottom line is a board member can issue a letter at any time, and it should always include, if it's an individual board member, that, you know, this is the opinion of me as a board member in my individual capacity, or something along those lines. And I don't know, I feel like I'm channeling, you know, Mr. Stork. You know, we don't need to babysit ourselves through more language. We're elected officials, and if you want to write a letter and you want to say in my individual capacity, this is how I think about something, you should be able to do it and move on. But why hamstring ourselves? If you want to write an advocacy letter and you want to ask some other board members with some advance time to be able to do it, that's fine. I think the real issue here is around the word advocacy. What is, I don't know what that means. If we've already voted on something, what are you advocating? So that seems to be implying something below the surface here that's not being said. Ms. Evans, you substituted the word lobby, and maybe that's it. But if the board's already voted, then you're not lobbying for anything. It's
Was this your forum topic?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm
I
just
guess
saying.
Before you came in, we were trying to figure, because it was a while back before we did this, and so some of
It
us are
doesn't
trying
matter.
to
What I'm saying is
reconstruct.
that the word in 4, it says members may issue advocacy letters dissenting. Who would you be advocating to in dissenting? Because we've already voted. So this doesn't really it frankly doesn't make any sense. What I think maybe, and I don't want to put any words in Ms. Rune's mouth, but I think that if you want to explain where you are on a position relevant to maybe how the board voted, you should be able to explain that, period. And you're an individual board member who's elected in your own right, and if you want to explain something, you can explain it.
Right,
but this doesn't even make sense in terms of...
But I think there has been, and Ms. Malberg, can you also say, what was the impetus for this? Can you follow the trail for us if we're looking to see?
I'd like to suggest it was something that came from Mr. McElveen, and it was there was a time-sensitive issue with the legislature, and that was how this, and I don't remember what it was about.
I know exactly what it was about.
One second. I asked the clerk a question. She has the data. Brought forward by. Okay.
This was a letter to Liberty University to admonish Liberty University because some people didn't like what a Liberty University official said, and to make sure that VHSL did not host any future activities, which we have no control over VHSL. And anyway, that in and of itself was a governance issue of driving an opinion of the board on something that we hadn't voted on, that had nothing to do with, frankly, the purview and the lanes that this board should stay within. And that's where we get ourselves in trouble. When we start driving far afield to attempt to score political points is when we get ourselves in trouble. If we would stay within the lanes of what the board should be focused on, which is, I'm looking across at the wall, academics, essential life skills, and responsibility of the community, then we're good. So I feel like maybe the first section is potentially appropriate. The second section, because the board's already taken a formal position. But in any event, I don't see that this has an appropriate place on this agenda at this point, because I think essential members who helped form this are missing. And I think that we owe our colleagues their due. And people have lives, and I'm not going to...
I got that. But go ahead, and I'm not going to disagree with you.
I'm thrilled that, people get to take, the trips
so
that they take.
So you have a problem with the process, but you don't have any...
I have a problem with the process, but I also have a problem with it. I think that there's some implication in 3 and 4 that it's on something that we've already taken a formal issue. And is it a formal... We've taken a position or taken a vote, and what does that mean? And and so I feel like we're just devolving into spending our time unwisely.
We're going to have to take some pulse of the board. Ms. Palchuk.
Yes, thank you. I was one of the board committee members last year. I believe we spent almost a year looking at this. So I think it's important, the time issue, and it was brought to us from a forum topic, and we spent quite a bit of time in with council. So the time issue, I think, was a concern from that advocacy letter. That was the reaction that brought this to the board was that board members were asking for signature letters from other board members very quickly. And so I agree that we don't want to bar people from doing that, but I do support keeping the 48 hours in there. I don't recall our full conversation to the board members. I think it sounds like at least 3 of us are here today, so the majority are here today. We were trying to be comprehensive. So I do hear Ms. Corbett-Sanders saying perhaps they shouldn't be called advocacy letters and just letters, but I think we wanted to, we got to a point where we wanted to be cautious in saying we can't just give guidance if there has been a formal position and we agree with it, because we know board members may dissent. So we came to a compromise to include that language in the letters. So it's not always going to be board members who agree, but if they are dissenting, or if it is not the entire board signing the letter, I think we wanted it to be clear that if it's on board letterhead, that it should be clearly stated that this may not express the views of the whole board. So that was why we had that language in there. So I would support keeping it in there.
Would you support collapsing the two into one?
So what's tricky about 1 and 2, and where we were trying to differentiate, we spent a long time looking at other letterhead.
That's what we wanted to know,
and it's all mostly coming back to me. It's been a while. We looked at quite a bit. It was the difference between individual, just your name on the letterhead, and all board members on the letterhead. I think we came to the opinion that as other boards and other, legislators have letterhead that only has their name, because we are printing this in-house, we can easily just have, I send a letter and it only says Dahlia Palchik, school board member, as opposed to listing all of the other members' names on there. So that was the difference. I think it may be fixing the language to make it more clear, but that was the difference between if you're sending a letter on your own individual FCPS letterhead, or if you're sending it on letterhead with the entire board listed on there.
Right. Well, we don't have individual letterhead. We can talk about that, and that was not talked about here. I believe that's the way the county board of supervisors, they have individual
and that's
letterhead,
what we discussed on our board, is that
we don't.
That was our recommendation, from my understanding, on the
that's not
governance
here.
committee.
Okay, that's not here.
Well, I think so that should be part of the conversation. I don't know that I don't know that we deemed it necessary to put in here, but it was
That's
going
a big
to come
change.
forward.
I think it is. It's a big
with that
change.
recommendation.
That's a huge change. And then I think there's also I appreciate this conversation, Dahlia, because not being on there and having
it's been a
trying
while.
to manage this all together.
understand.
But I do know that that's the way the Board of Supervisors does it. If that was part of the conversation, that's also something that we as a group
Right.
should consider. But I think that has its own and then how does the entire board get notified when
True.
you do that?
But that's why I'm saying it's not as easy as collapse or not collapse 1 and 2,
Right.
because it was part of that
Right,
conversation.
because that's why. Okay,
and it was
thank
part
you.
of it was many meetings conversation to compromise and to say, well, how do we make it more comfortable to send these maybe individual letters if the whole board, if it hasn't taken a position or does not agree.
Right.
So that was part of that conversation. So
Right.
I'm just trying to give a little more context. I understand
thank
we're not
you.
making that decision today. The timeliness is very important. General Assembly, case in point number 1, things happen there every minute. So we wanted to not tie our hands and say that we had to have conversation. For many of us, it is difficult to even come together daily. We do not meet daily. So I think it's important that we have a mechanism to be a timely board and send those letters in a timely fashion. For 3 and 4, I feel like we had gone into the legal conversation and the First Amendment rights around 3 and 4. So whether we take out advocacy letters so that they are just issue letters, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer or a wordsmith. But we can discuss it. I do think that we wanted to be mindful that we had to take into account when a formal position has not been taken and how that can be addressed, because that letter had not been a formal position. So it does sound like we have to have more conversation on this. But thank you for taking the feedback, and I will try to go through my notes. And see if
I would appreciate that. And yeah, board members, we because we have 3 annual reports tonight, and we have one more agenda item, which I think should go a little bit quicker. I don't want to get too far behind. I don't want to get like 50 minutes behind. I do have you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I have 4 go-backs now. So, oh, okay. Yes, let me do the go-backs, and then I'll call for it to see if there's support. But thank you, because I still want people to. So we have Ryan, Karen, Corbett Sanders, and Ms. Strauss. And if we can all be quick and a few minutes.
So my sense is the way to get to yes on this, at least the last piece of it, is just to delete number 4, because in that way we are not telling people you can do it explicitly, but you aren't saying you can't do it, and it just would be exist as it currently does, that board members can issue advocacy on their own behalf, and so. That would be my suggestion, is to delete it.
All right. Ms. Corbett Sanders.
So I have, and mine's probably closer to what Ms. Palchik has suggested. I think where I have a bit of heartburn on 3 and 4 is kind of what I had started with, which is I don't know how you define advocacy.
So defining advocacy is one of your...
Well, defining advocacy
is one of your... You're advocating to define advocacy.
I'm suggesting. But the second piece of it is in items 3 and 4, we don't want to squelch people's First Amendment rights by any chance. I mean, that's not what we're suggesting. But an advocacy letter suggests that we are continuing to push a policy forward. And so we're actually, once a policy has been adopted, it's not an advocacy letter. It is actually a letter either supporting the board's adopted position or a letter expressing dissension from the board's adopted position. But the advocacy should have stopped by the time that position has been adopted. And so that's why that... I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, that's why advocacy is the problem word.
It's the word advocacy, which is what I said initially. So if we just take the word advocacy out in 3 and 4, and it reads members may issue letters supporting, or members may issue letters dissenting from the board's adopted position, then you're not advocating, you're just expressing your own views on something.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Strauss.
Okay, this gets a little closer to what I'm a little more comfortable with. One of the questions in Virginia Code and how they envision school boards, because it is an unusual animal that we have been settled with, and it is in the state law. On the one hand, on your political Twitter feed, Facebook page, any that you can say whatever you want, obviously. And as school board members, you can explain why you dissented, why you disagreed, because you still have your First Amendment rights. But under Virginia Code, there is a sort of gray area when it is right, when are you organizing a political thing, and when are you explaining your vote? And I don't have a good definition, but I know that there have been times where the state has criticized us or other boards when we stepped over the line. And I don't know exactly where the line is, but I just know that if you are trained at the state, they kind of caution you as to where this line is. And that is my discomfort. And I don't know exactly where it is, but we've had our hands slapped if the state has decided we've become too political after a position has been taken. When we're still debating it, that's all
right. I get that.
So I don't know.
And this that's where what you're talking about, Ms. Strauss, is the heart of this issue. Why it has come up. There is that fine line between First Amendment rights and what we are taught as board members is best practices,
right,
as a body with one voice.
Right. And the General Assembly are not opinions. And the General Assembly are not held to this. They're constituted differently.
Yes. Lucky
The Board of
us.
Supervisors are supposed to also be as one voice, and they also struggle with this one.
Right. Mr. Moon, I had you as a go back. Is that correct?
I'm okay.
You're okay. Miss.
Just 2 points. The clerk made clear, and I don't know if it made it because she doesn't have a microphone. We're talking about a forum topic from May 26th, 2016. We're literally 2 years past the forum topic. So pardon me if I'm a little bit incredulous that this has made its way into our agenda. And number 2, I'll do deference, Ms. Strauss. That's legal advice. I don't want legal advice from one of us. I want legal advice from a chair, and we also don't have an attorney here. So yet again,
All right. So
the standard is that if you want to write something, you are an elected official. You write and you can add the line in my individual capacity as a board member, and that's it. Otherwise, let's have our own letterhead. And if you want to write a letter under your own letterhead as an elected official for your magisterial district or at large, do it. But we are unnecessarily complicating this way beyond what we should be spending time on.
I have Mr. Wilson, but I just want to speak before that. I did take you off the list because you said I thought you just wanted to. Okay, guys, seriously, we have committee members and we have another topic. Can I just take a pulse of the board right now? And I will let you both speak. I'll let you both speak. Can I just take a pulse of the board right now? Mr. Wilson talked about it. I talked about it. And we see we're kind of split down the middle on some of these, and we don't have enough time. So at this point, what I would like and what I would suggest is for the clerks have taken extensive notes on this, but I would also like you to bring in writing, copying to the clerks, copy the full board on it. That's fine. And then let us, and then we'll probably end up taking it back to governance by wordsmithing your points into it. And then because I don't, but that's my advocacy right now. And yeah, because there's just so many dissenting opinions. I will wait to hear the comments of these other two people because that was kind of my personal comments since I didn't talk. And Ms. Keys-Gamarra followed by Mr. Wilson.
I just want to clarify because I think I was the one that was kind of slammed on the whole First Amendment thing, and that wasn't where I was going. I am concerned about this balance, and so I supported going back because I think I'd rather take out those paragraphs and not seem to give permission or a prohibition. I think this is a case of less is more, right? I think the less we say, probably the better. And I do have concerns about disparaging remarks regarding the board after we've made decisions and all of that, and how much we can say about that, I'm not sure. But certainly my comments, I did not want to be taken as anti-First Amendment or anything like that. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you for clarifying. I think that's a very important thing. That we all would agree that we're not looking to suppress the First Amendment rights of our fellow board members, and I'm glad everybody seems to be in agreement with that now. My question, I guess, initially is, maybe board members have have a letter that's forthcoming that they want to share with the board tonight. Okay, it just as I was thinking about how this came onto our agenda tonight, it occurred to me that maybe after such a long delay, that maybe there was something that we should talk about publicly right now, and I do look forward. Madam Clerk, to you giving me the information regarding when the governance committee finally vote. Oh, perfect. So we can all know exactly how long it's been sitting in the queue of the governance committee. I would just say that I like Mr. McElveen's approach, except maybe we should take the X and cross out a lot more. As Ms. Keys-Gamarra has pointed out, maybe less is more. And I kind of think that a lot of this could be crossed out. Maybe we don't need to be saying some of this stuff because we do need to avoid the perception of suppressing dissenting viewpoints. We need to promote the perception that we look forward to public discussions and receiving public opinions. And in fact, we are all advocates for our districts and our constituencies and individuals who come to us. And in fact, we need to present and tell the people of Fairfax County that we are in fact going to continue working on their behalf on matters that are of importance. And that may especially happen when we disagree with the decision of this board. So, I think that this was very premature to bring this up tonight. I think the conversation reflects the premature nature of it, and I wish that we had just tabled it right off the bat.
All right. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Wilson, but there was agreement in the Governance Committee in January of 2017 that it would be presented to the board at a future work session. So I guess what we have on the table now is the advocacy that several of us brought forward, is that board members bring comments based upon this work session, and then it goes back to governance. Could I see hands in support of that? All right, thank you. We will take a 2-minute break, and we will go to the second item, reviewing the status of the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. All right, board members, our 2 minutes is up. Okay. All right, board members, the next item on our agenda is the membership of the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee. We had a request from the committee to change some of the structure, and it's based upon taking out some groups that are no longer viable groups and adding some slots in the other. I will, Mr. Bussey, if you would like to just speak to, because it was your group that MSOAC brought this forward to I'm sorry, I said that wrong. But if you just if you can find a microphone here and just.
There we go. Okay. Thank you. When the committee first got started about 25 years ago, it was a coalition between staff and parents. And we wanted to ensure that the parents really had a real voice in the committee. So we were looking for a 2-to-1 ratio between community parents and staff. That is, community parents on one side and staff with respect to the one on the other side. During the years, what we've noticed was that on the roster, we would have a full complement of parents, but in terms of attendance, and I just looked at the statistics tonight, so for example, out of all the meetings for the committee, parents and community members were attending about 68% of the time, whereas staff was attending 81% of the time. So that meant in real life that the staff was much more active in the committee and so forth. So back in February, we made a request for some changes to allow us to identify and work with more parent and community groups, and also to restore for the 5 regions. In the past, they were able to select a parent, administrator, teacher, or counselor, and that was taken out. We wanted to add back the parent so that there would be full complement. The other issue was that many of the, of course, we all wear 2 hats, and so many of our members were both parents and community folks, but they were also staff members. So in actuality, what wound up happening is we still had a preponderance of staff members who were attending the meetings regularly. So what we are trying to do is give us the flexibility so that we can, within the governance manual authorization, to nominate a sufficient number of parent community groups persons so that they really have an active voice in the committee. So that was really our intent. And we made this request in February of this year. The last thing I need to say is our chair, Ms. Judy Hall Howard, she's been ill. She's recuperating, but I've been discussing this matter with her, of course. We're in full agreement on this point. So this really represents the work of the committee and the work of the chair. So. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Board members, I have Karen Keys-Gamarra, followed by Karen Corbett-Sanders, followed by Ms. Strauss, and then Mr. Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bussey, thank you for being here. I know that you've been working on these issues for many, many years. Can you tell us how long have you worked with?
Oh, please.
I think my kids were in kindergarten now.
Yeah, I was saying to Ms. Strauss, this will be the 25th year for the committee, and I was one of the founding members of the committee. So, yeah.
So thank you. Thank you very much. I know that this work represents a lot of hard work. I have just a few questions, and I fully want to respect the committee's desire to have the flexibility because you guys see what's actually working, right? So one thing I noticed is CPP is taken off of there. Is it what College Partnership Advisory Board? What was the?
They no longer exist.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't get that memo.
So all the ones that are striking off are the ones that no longer
don't exist.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then the only other question I had, just based on the kind of work that I've done, I know that you've got the Advanced Academic Committee on there.
Yes.
I don't see anybody from the Special Education PTA. And I have specific concerns because I think oftentimes children can fall in both categories and one seems to exclude the other. So would you see, I would ask you guys to consider adding someone from that group. I think perhaps there has been already a focus on special education and the over-representation of minority students in that group. But I specifically want to make sure that we have strong representation from that advanced academics because I think that's where minority students often fall on the short end of the stick. And so what would you think about considering that?
Well, again, a little background on that. In fact, I went back and I looked at our first report 25 years ago, we identified the overrepresentation of students with emotionally disturbed students being in self-contained classes 25 years ago. So when I went back and I looked at our reports, so in our 1996 report, our 1998 report, our 2000 report, our 2003 report, our 2006 report, 7 report, and our 2017 report, those were the issues that we had reported on, we had findings. So let me say this, that the issue of students with disability, particularly minority students with disability, that's at the top of our agenda. We also have representation on the committee now from a staff member from special ed services. So that's authorized in the governance manual. They're on, but I think probably more importantly, our current incoming chair and many of the members of the committee, they're on the committee because they had personal experience with their child with respect to either disparate treatment or overrepresentation in terms of special ed. So this is special ed, students with disability. That's at the top of our agenda. Whether or not we have someone, and having a voice is fine, but I mean, that's the top of our agenda, period. And so that continues to be one of the major issues with respect to closing the achievement gap and also equity and inclusion with respect to minority students who are disabled. So, yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the work that you've done on this because I think it's important to always be reflective and take a look at how we can improve our best practices. And I do think that the MSAOC is one of our best advocacy committees.
Thank you.
So thank you, and thank you for all of your hard work. You have certainly built a legacy with us because of that. I do appreciate Ms. Keys-Gamarra mentioning SEPTA because I was going to mention SEPTA. I think it's really important to have parents of students with disabilities on the committee. There were a couple of other organizations I was kind of surprised that we didn't have. For example, the educators associations. And so I was wondering where they fall in this because I think it's important to have. I see that you have the Hispanic Educators Association, but not any of the other educators associations.
Yeah, well, thank you. So when we made the request back in February, we had already contacted the Asian American Educators Association. We also had contacted FAPSE, which is the Fairfax County Association for Black Educators, to see if they would be interested in joining our committee. So that's when we made the request back in February. And there are some consequences because of the delay. They've been attending our meetings, but they can't vote. They don't have any official standing. So we are so we have the Hispanic educators. They're on our committee. Our proposal was to add the Asian Educators Association and to add FAPSE also to our group. We also have representation from the Elementary Principals Association, the Middle School Principals Association, the High School Principals Association. They're currently authorized under the governance manual. They're currently on the committee as well. So I agree, I think we are really pushing not only having associations, but also having the diversity of the groups on our committee as well. So, yes.
So I would advocate amending this to specify both the Asian educators and the FABC, as well as SEPTA under the PTAs as an additional voice. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Ms. Strauss.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, Mr. Bussey.
Yeah, same here.
We were back there together when we first invented
Yes, we
this
were.
group.
Yes.
Because I know that is what was needed was more community representation.
That's
and to
correct.
not be so overwhelmingly staffed. And for example, in sort of B3, where you have 5 members representing the regions and it's not staff, but where the committee can decide, because I know the other issue is because over time, organizations will have been a part of it and then they don't come or they
Yes.
don't appoint.
Yes.
And so this gives the MSAOC and the committee leadership, not staff, but the community members, the opportunity to continue to appoint members, and they can fill any of those buckets that are currently unfilled, because I know that's part of the frustration with these committees.
Yes.
So, and again, I think it's under 7, you have 5 representatives nominated from community organizations chosen by the MSAOC. In other words, you get to choose, because that's part of the frustration, is that there will be organizations will be active one year and then they drop out the next year.
That's correct. That's been our experience.
Exactly. And so this gives, what you've proposed here, gives you far more leeway to choose current organizations, current members that you know are going to come and be active, rather than sort of defunct groups or people that don't come.
That's correct. And particularly if it's an unfilled position, say at the beginning of the school term, then that would give us the flexibility, because again, it doesn't make any sense to bring people on board in April at the end of the year in May. So that's been part of our frustrations.
Right. So I see under A7 and B3, you have basically 10 more positions that you all can appoint in whatever way you want. That if you need more parents who have experience with children with disabilities or other groups, you get to choose that.
Yeah, and the regions as well, because again, on 3, it authorizes the region. So in fact, we had a real case, I think it was Region 3, had recommended a parent who was a distinguished civil rights attorney who wanted to be on the committee. They made the recommendation. And I think he's gone at this particular point.
Right, and that is the frustration. So the bottom line is you have greater flexibility with, I see 10, and how many more positions that you all get to appoint?
Well, it depends on how many that are unfilled.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But basically, it enables you to preserve the balance for the community, and you can rearrange this every year depending on what the needs are.
That's correct.
Right.
So another issue is, again, I mentioned that some of the board appointees are staff, but they appointed them because they're also parents.
Right.
So again, when I have to look at the staff community ratio, we have to take that in consideration. Right. So, yeah.
But this puts a lot more, puts the ability for the MSAOC to control your own members, which is to be preferred.
And for those organizations, individuals who want to be on the committee, who come to us, that gives us the flexibility to go ahead and make the nomination. Of course, you all have to approve it.
Yeah.
To go ahead and make the nomination.
Yeah. Well, because I would hope that we would let you go forward with what is here, and then if you want more or others, that's fine. But certainly, for starters, you need to have this so you can form this committee, and so that you're up and running with the people that you know are going to be active and
that's
useful.
Correct. Yes, and we could also, to your point, we could also make sure that we have representation from parents and community folks with respect to the special needs population, in addition to the folks on the committee as well.
Mr. Moon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the recommendation for these modifications. I can support this with Ms. Corbett-Sanders' amendment to be included. I want to thank Ms. Corbett-Sanders for mentioning Asian Educators Association to be part of this group that can be considered one of those 5 potentially in number A7, where MSAOC is going to pick 5 organizations, that one of them could be Asian Educators Association.
No, one of them was. I mean, that was, again, when we made the recommendation in February, one of our proposals was for the Asian American educators to be.
And I'm glad that is coming in as an amendment by,
yes.
From Ms. Corbett-Sanders. I will support that. A couple of clarifying questions dealing with B3, the last sentence. Any appointments unfilled by October 1 can be nominated. Is that the intent of MSAOC to nominate and to seek the support of the board, because board is the one that is making the appointments.
That's correct. So we would just nominate. That is correct. Yes.
Okay, that's what I have. Thank you.
Ms. Schultz.
So I really appreciate the effort to broaden the opportunity for people to participate, but I have a couple of questions.
Certainly.
First of all, there's nothing here actually when I read this that yields that there be any parents. All of these could be appointed and nobody winds up being a parent, the way it reads, as opposed to being more prescriptive that in a committee of 36 people, that a certain number should actually be parents of current school children. And so that's concerning to me because we're talking about their children. And not that people who don't have current children aren't important, but the parent voice is missing here in terms of being carved out specifically. And I say that specifically with B3 because I'm not sure I understand that 5 members representing the regions, so 1 member from each region would be appointed. I don't know who would do the choosing, who's doing the choosing. So
in that case, it will be the regional.
But it doesn't say that. It just says by staff. So I don't know. It's the region assistant superintendent.
Yes.
What is the mechanism by which they're going to secure, applications and how are they chosen by what? And then also a division across. A representation across elementary, middle, and high school. Like we make sure we do it for the principals, for example. So we're very clear that we're going to have somebody from the elementary, middle, and high school principals association. But if I think about the 5 regions, for example, this is one of the things I've advocated for in our advisory panels is if you had 1 elementary, middle, and high school parent from each of the 5 regions. That's 15 parents. And it's 15 parents diverse in geography and diverse by covering all age groups. You all of a sudden, by default, have a breadth of parent voices, of ages, of grades, of different pyramids, different areas of the county. And so I sort of see that missing. I agree that and I don't know if the Asian American educators is the right, but I do think that there needs to be a spot for them. But I sometimes wonder if making a committee bigger doesn't actually engage people less because there's more shoulders on which to carry the work, and therefore, there's going to be enough people there, they can carry it. And so I almost wonder if that doesn't maybe potentially negatively work, that if you have like a committed group, that's who's there and that's who's can show up. Now, everybody has life and, these are volunteers and we're very grateful for everything they have to lend. But I'm just wondering if at some point it doesn't become unwieldy and we're not spreading the work across so many people that not everybody feels like they have to be a part of the lift.
So we stay at 36. The governance manual says right now 36, and we're not expanding beyond that. So it would be 24 parent community and 12 staff.
I just mean that with the 36, you were only at the 6, whatever it was, 6, I forgot the statistic, the 62 or 6 whatever percent attendance.
Right.
And that if the 36 wasn't too big and if the recommendation wasn't maybe to shrink it and be more focused or targeted to get the voices that you wanted to get engagement. So that's one of my offers. I do think that...
May I say this?
Yeah.
So there's a secret to attendance. What we found is that people who come to us and say they want to be on our committee, they come. And just by going to an organization saying, could you give us a representative, that really doesn't work. So what we try to do is match up. So, for example, with the regions, we contact the region If they don't have a teacher or counselor or administrator who want to be on, and if there's a parent who lives in that particular region, we will contact the regional office and say, Mrs. Jones is interested in being on our committee. Would you nominate them? And that's the process
Right.
in terms of that.
Right. Well, I do think an effort to more broadly solicit as opposed to getting the same people to be recommending other people. I mean,
Yeah.
you sort of get cuts from the same cloth that way as opposed to broadening the perspective.
Yes.
I do still have heartburn with the fact that each of us would have one appointee and the student would have two. I don't understand that. I think the student should have one and we should have one. And if there's ways to amplify the ability to ensure that it's parent participation and across regions, pyramids, and grades, I would be far more comfortable with sort of solidifying parent involvement so that the parent voice is reflected in the work of advocacy for students. Thank you.
Ms. Palchak.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Bassi. Question. First, I have one clarifying question, and I appreciate the thought put into this. For B3, that any appointments unfilled by October 1st, the way I was reading it is that only applies to those 5 members representing the regions under B3. Is that correct, or is that for any appointment?
Yeah, that one probably should be a C.
Okay.
That would be.
That's for any
That would be
appointment.
my proposal. Make that last sentence a C. Yes.
Okay. No, I agree with that. I think there was some confusion, and so that will clarify it. Thank you. The other question I had, and under B1, the administrative staff members, I don't see the Chief Academic and Equity Office listed there, or someone from that office. Is there a reason it's not listed? Is it just because it's a newer office?
Dahlia, that's the superintendent's office. I'm part of that office, so that's where it's
So
listed.
that was my other question. Is it?
No,
Can
that
we
would include-
assume that it will always be from your office, or should it be specifically your office?
Well, the superintendent's office is just, it's the superintendent, myself, or the deputy, and so it would be one of the 3 of us. But
I mean, this is a governance committee topic to the whole board. If you all want to be more specific in the language, I mean, we'll be more specific in the language. It's how you want to do business with this advisory group.
Well, this is why I'm at. If you feel comfortable with the language, I'm comfortable with the
Dr.
language.
Duran he's been an active member, participant of our committee. In fact, if Ms. Howard was here today, I think she would express appreciation for Dr. Duran's active involvement in the committee. So I think in real time, that's in fact. So that we are currently working very closely with the Chief Academic and Equity Officer.
Okay. Well, if you feel comfortable with the way it's written, I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yes, I'm amending the C. That's on there. And just out of curiosity, I wasn't able to pull up the current members. I know there are at least several who are parents. Do you have an idea how many? I know my appointee is a parent of 2 children. I do believe we have several on there, as we do on every committee, appointed by us or others who are parents.
Yeah, I have a list of the current members. So I'm sorry, your question.
I know it was brought up just to ensure that there's representation of parents on the committee. I don't know that we specifically put that in any of our governance manuals, but I do know that parents are I just want to clarify, parents are represented and are on the committee. I don't know
absolutely.
if I could say how many. I know definitely my appointee is a parent, and there are several others on
yes,
there.
I can tell you exactly. So actually on the roster, so there are 14 parent community members and 11 staff this year.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No questions. We have 2 amendments. Ms. Corbett-Sanders, the easy one right here is making the last sentence in B, C. So any appointments unfilled by October 1 of each calendar year can be nominated. And, you're putting it up? Okay. All right, so 7 is amended. Is that correct? Is that what you? Okay. And then Ms. Palchik, if you'll go down. Last sentence has become C. All right. Mr. Wilson. Oh, Mr. Wilson and then Mr. Moon, questions?
Yeah, thanks. I just, when we were, if you scroll up a little bit, Madam Clerk, I'm looking at number 4 in parens, and it says one representative from the Hispanic Educator Association. In several other places, it specifically says like right above it, the Fairfax NAACP. Is that intended to be the Fairfax
Yes.
Hispanic Educators Association?
That's correct. In both cases. the
FCPS, right? It's the schools association.
Yeah, I think that's the Asian American Educators Association. I think their name is actually Asian Educators Association.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Sorry, yes.
So one of the things we discussed was for the groups that we wanted to be members, permanent members, we put them in
We put them not in
2,
7.
3, 4,
right.
5. So I'm wondering if for consistency, we shouldn't, if we are saying that these organizations are permanent members, if we shouldn't simply name them as permanent members and then say, in addition, 2 representatives nominated from other community
Right,
organizations.
make sure you understood then that we had to keep the number. So we would change, we would change 7 from 5 to 2.
Right, and I would suggest that just because then it's consistent that otherwise it just looks odd that we are naming some organizations in 2, 3, 4, and 5, and others we're lumping together, and I'm not seeing why we would do that rather than have it be consistent.
So my question to that, and I may have misunderstood, was Dr. Bussey explaining that generally members are more active when they've asked to join rather than having it always be appointed. So I don't know if we feel comfortable specifically designating those organizations, if perhaps, and SEPTA is a new organization. I do hope
Right.
they stick around, but they were not around before this year. So if
Well, I
you
guess,
would
Dr.
like
Bussey,
more
if you can answer that question, because board members will be voting on these changes. It was an amendment by one board member. So what do you think about that? Would you rather have the flexibility to ask those and keep it as it was with 5 representatives or do you
Yeah, so in the past, for example, I'll give you a clear example. We had, it was named, the Korean YMCA was one of the members for a long time on our committee. And it was one person from that group who was very active for, I think, 5, 7 years. Well, she got a job to teach English in Korea, and she was gone. And we kept going back to the organization, we kept going back to them, and they really couldn't get anyone. So just to answer your question, it really is the individual who's passionate, who want to be to contribute and so forth, and that's what really works. That in terms of attendance, participation, and so forth, and to have the flexibility with respect to particularly those organizations where the person is no longer active or the organization is not interested, the flexibility. Otherwise, we have to come back to you to make the changes on the assigned list. And I don't think that's something that you all would want. So, yes.
If I could.
Yes, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
So my concern is reducing number 7 from, I believe, 5 to 2. I think when Dr. Bussey began his speaking, he said that them having flexibility and being able to get these folks on board who will be committed is really what has been proven to work.
Yes.
And so I would be very concerned about reducing that number because, after all, I do believe this has been one of our most active and long-standing committees that I think has done excellent work And so I would encourage this board to enable them to do that. I think that we've got some very committed folks on there already. And so, Dr. Bussey, if you'd like to, suggest how we can, or help us figure out how best to serve those concerns that you raised, I would, like to hear that, because I'm very concerned about reducing that from 5 to 2.
Yeah, so I think with respect to the NAACP, the Hispanic Educators, the Asian Educators Association, and FAPSI, I think that's fine. But I think beyond that, we should have the flexibility to go ahead and those organizations, those individuals who are committed and want to participate, be able to do that. So, yes.
So then how would that impact number 7 with respect to the number of representatives nominated?
What we would have to do is we would have to change the number of
yeah.
people on the board, because right now it is a number of 36, and that's how that came to be. And because we have had regular participation over the years from the Hispanic educators as well as the Fairfax NAACP, that's why they got their own standing slots. So then that would be another amendment by our board to do that. But I have Ms. Corbett Sanders, who was the maker of the motion. So what is your advocacy?
So my advocacy would be to actually enlarge the committee by those few slots, because I think it is important. If what we are talking about is the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee, then we need to have a very diverse representation in each of those organizations, represent constituencies that are important, and especially when you come to both the Black school educators and the Asian educators, it's very important, because our children benefit by having a more diverse teaching core. And so who is better to share their views of the impact of having that diversity in our teaching core than that diverse group? And so I would advocate that we actually increase the size of the committee to 39, and that then allows the MSAOC to retain the flexibility of those 5 representatives from other community organizations. And we could even say not to exceed 39.
Okay. Anybody else who wanted to? Ms. Strauss and then Ms. Evans.
I was going to say, well, that was my suggestion, because I know that they want the flexibility. And
Yes.
so I would just expand the group and not to exceed 39, and that retains your flexibility in our recommendation for these groups. So you get what you need.
So Ms. Evans, go ahead.
So I agree with you about needing the flexibility, so I wasn't trying to reduce the amount of flexibility. We need to go up, though, so we can see the wording, Ms. Malberg. So I guess where I was being stopped by this was, I guess I thought my recommendation was more housekeeping, because if we are going to designate these 3 groups that they are permanent members, if we want to give flexibility, then I think we need to reword this. If we wanted to say 5, 5 nominated from community organizations such as, if we did that, then that would give them the flexibility, and then that does give. It says, okay, for now we think these are the organizations. We could certainly do that, and but I think as long as we're saying including, then we're designating them, then we might as well just give them a slot. So I don't know. I'm of 2 minds about increasing the size.
But Ms. Evans, I think what you're trying to say is, if we will vote if we want to include all 3 of these organizations. I will vote on them one by one. Okay. I think that will be better. But then they would become 3, 4. They would become 5, 6, and 7 if we do all 3, and then. The current number 7 would still maintain the language, 5 representatives from each nominated. And I don't even know, Ms. Malberg, where it says the number. Is it in a different place in the manual where I know it's 36?
I mean, I could go in either direction. I'm just thinking,
right there. Okay,
if we decide to increase the size, that's fine with me. If the committee feels that they want to be sure that they have all of those, I understand the having the flexibility. But if I'm just saying, if we're going to name them, we might as well just name them the way we've named everyone else.
Right, I agree.
So I guess my point is, I agree with Ms. Evans. I actually think it just should say one representative from each, and then it should list all of the ones that it's one representative from each, including us, and then it should say, and 5 from among the following, and list the organizations to give you the flexibility that if, the Korean YMCA or somebody doesn't have one, you can get one from one of the other ones. I mean, because this becomes unnecessarily repetitive, and what you want to say is, okay, who gets one? And then if you need flexibility, but I don't think we need to do that here. I honestly don't want us to wordsmith, but I'm going to go back to, and I don't know if I'm making I don't know what the process is. If we're voting on this tonight, if we're putting it up as new business, I mean, we don't usually vote during a work session.
To these changes, in order then to put them on for new business, that's what we'll do.
In order to put them on for new business, and then we would have to have an amendment.
Yes.
But I'm still going to advocate that the way this is worded, this says 24 parents, communities, and members and students. It could wind up being 22 community members and 2 students. And I don't think that behooves us well. And I do think that there should be a goal for parents, because otherwise we are not being intentional in the effort to get to parents. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, if somebody from the Fairfax County Council of PTAs is serving, I'm going to guess that maybe they're a parent. Not always, but I'm going to guess maybe they are, but not necessarily from any of the others. So then it becomes more incumbent, is it incumbent upon the school board members to select a parent? Mine, who was the chairman of MSAOC for several years, is no longer a current parent, and so it's not that he isn't important, but do I need to, are we shifting the responsibility to the board members to work harder to pick parents, or do we have a goal of half of the committee being parents? I don't know if we're going to do that now, or we're just going to say, hey, we'd like to give you guidance to try to get as many parents as possible. But I still maintain that the student representatives should not outweigh the Fairfax County Council PTAs, should not outweigh Head Start, should not outweigh the NAACP. We should have one student representative.
Well, if I can say this, though, I think if we had to have current parents, it would really tie our hands. What happens is that younger parents, they're so tied up in their individual schools that they really don't have time to look at the system 1,000 feet off the ground. And we really had difficulty and get particularly young parents. Now, our current incoming chair, he does have young Fred Grant, who is our incoming chair. He does have two young children in the school, but it's very difficult. So
I don't want to be ageist. I don't necessarily mean young parents. I must be at heart. But,
well, I meant current parents.
But also the experiences that parents are currently having on the ground do become important, because if everybody is always looking in the rearview mirror of what their experiences were, and nobody really has a pulse on what's happening now, then there's a disconnect. And I agree with you completely that a lot of families are overwhelmed, and it could be a more seasoned,
yes.
more seasoned parent, or a parent who's reached, maybe their caboose child has reached high school or something like that.
What we do invite, we put aside the beginning of the meetings for people to come to talk to the committee. So that's where we really get input from a lot of our new parents coming in. So again, we're very much sensitive to that point, to make sure that we're in touch with reality. So yes.
All right, so Ms. Schultz, what I can expect from you is you don't have any changes right now to this, and we'll vote on the proposed changes just to bring that forward as new business. And if you have any changes,
I do to one student.
And okay, and then, all right, well, okay, I don't know, that might cause discussion. So, nothing. Mr. Moon, done.
I'm done.
Okay. All right. Well, Okay, so where we are now is we have proposals from Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Corbett Sanders to, and we can change the language, Madam Clerk, we can work on that. But one represented from, and it's advanced academics, one represented from the Fairfax NAACP, one from the Hispanic Educators Association, and then one from the Asian Educators Association. Is everybody in favor of that? Mm-hmm. Okay. One from the Fairfax Association of Black Educators. One from the Special Education PTA. Wait, could I see hands? Colleague who made the amendment.
Because they are a subset of the overall population, and so it depends on how you define minority, but many people in that population believe that they are representing a minority.
I don't have a problem with it.
Okay. All right. So we will add that, and then Ms. Schultz had one, and we'll just vote on that now for ease. But if it doesn't pass, she can bring it up. Changing the slots of the student from 2 to 1. Yes.
The only thing that makes sense to me about 2 students is that students can often be extremely busy as well. So has it been your experience that if you have the 2 students, they're both attending, or that it kind of goes back and forth?
Yeah, well, there's 2 things about the students. One, we prefer juniors and not seniors. 2 students versus 1. They also, particularly at the end of the school term, they get tied up with, if they're a senior, sometimes even juniors with testing and so forth. So really it works out for the, and also I think there's a comfort level with having 2 students on there as opposed to one teenager with the rest of these old folks sitting around the table. So, yeah.
Seasoned. Right.
Okay, seasoned.
Do you have any comments? You want us to vote on yours?
Okay. You know, we have one student representative to our board,
Right.
and I actually think it makes it more prestigious. And I actually think you've made a good point. I think we do that with our student representatives. We don't have for our leadership development group that they cannot be seniors, and I don't have any problem saying who are a sophomore or junior because I think that does them a disservice and you a disservice. So I have no problem with us actually saying that it needs to be somebody who's a sophomore or junior.
Ms. Evans.
This is unusual. And so do we know the history of why there were originally 2 student reps? Because at least I believe on every other one of our advisory committees, it's been 1. Do we know anything about the history of how this happened? Did your committee ask for it to be 2?
To be honest with you, that's one I'm
lost
totally
to history.
I'm totally
Lost to
incompetent
history.
on. Yes,
Okay.
lost to history. Yes.
Well, I can go along with the piece of Mrs. Schultz's amendment to make it a, what did you say, sophomore or junior? Sophomore or junior. I can support that. I'm kind of 2 minds on the other one because it's been that I would hate to change it if there had been some reason for it that we're not aware of, and we're being told that it's been a good experience to have 2 on there. So without more.
Well, I mean, so this logically it allows if there's a senior and a junior or sophomore, it allows a break-in period. So particularly when the senior has to do with finals and so forth, and that and from our experience, we've found that the junior for the next year is much more active as a senior on our committee because they're more familiar. We buddied them up with someone on the committee and so forth. So that really works in that sense. So,
well, how do you feel then about limiting your appointees to sophomores or juniors so they don't get into that? I mean, do you not support limiting it to?
I think if we have flexibility, I wouldn't want to exclude if there's a senior.
You wouldn't want to exclude a senior.
Yeah, we've had some very good seniors on there who have gone on and done, while they were on the committee, and gone on and done some excellent things. So I think we had the flexibility, that would be fine.
So you'd rather have flexibility than specify. All right, thank you for that information. That's important.
All right, we can tentatively vote now, and if it doesn't pass, Ms. Schultz, you can continue your advocacy and conversation. But there is something on the table.
Continue it on the letterhead.
And Ms. Corbett Sanders, do we, or, Mr. Kovacs, do we have also expanding the committee size to 39?
That's at the top.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's vote on that first. That one's easy. 39, we're all in support of that? Okay. And changing the student members just from 2 to 1. Support for that? Okay, so that fails at this point, but, you know. So these changes, as we discussed tonight, will be brought forward for new business. Ms. Strauss, you'll tell us when in the next few weeks, and then voted on and in
There was
order.
a question on the current high school sophomore, junior. Do we just want to leave that open? Okay, fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very much. Appreciate it.
We'll have a 2-minute break before we start on the ACE annual report.